When I first encountered the Orphan of Cause, I was genuinely horrified. When you step out onto the beach, you watch a dead alien give birth. The child stands up and takes a few steps out toward the water. You hear sobbing, as the game lets you know that this suffering is the hunter's fault. Then the orphan turns around, and it's a reflection of you. It's a hunter. It wields a weapon with one-handed and two-handed forms. It uses projectiles that deal blood tinge damage. It's anthropomorphic, despite being an alien. You can see its mother right there, and it doesn't look anything like her. It's also fast, aggressive, and deadly, like a hunter. I was horrified when I realized where the orphan learned all this from. The orphan was torn from its mother and tortured, killed, and dissected by the hunters. This is all the orphan knows, the totality of its life experience. Bloodborne created a fictional race of hyper-intelligent, infinitely wise alien gods. During this fight, we get to see what we look like to them. This, Bloodborne says, is who we humans really are. Let me start by giving a big spoiler warning. This essay is meant for people who are very familiar with the story of Bloodborne. If you haven't played it, please find a way to do so. It's one of the best games of all time, and one of the most talked about. This game is almost a decade old, and people are still putting out great content about it. I was inspired to make this by T.B. Skyen's The Many Meanings of Bloodborne, which made me realize that we're going to be talking about this game forever. It's like Casablanca or Citizen Kane. 50 years from now we'll still be playing. Maybe by then there'll be a PC port. What makes this game so narratively enriching for people is the concept of beasthood. Bloodborne doesn't pull any punches when it says what it thinks about the nature of humanity. The premise of this game is that there's this special blood that heals people, but also turns us into beasts, these violent, raging, blood-drunk animals. This essay is about beasthood, and my interpretation of it. I believe the healing and beast aspects of the blood are one and the same, that the blood is doing nothing more than making whole something that always existed inside humanity. I want to talk about what beasthood represents and why it connects with so many people. But first, we need to answer a question. Part 1. What's so bad about beasthood? Father Gascoigne is the character who first introduces us to beasthood. When we encounter him, he's standing over the butchered corpse of his wife, as well as several bystanders. Despite the fact that his physical features have not begun to change yet, it's clear that he's already a beast. This blood drunkenness is what beasthood is. The physical changes are important, but this madness is what defines beasthood. We can see it in the hunter mobs, the aggressive and violently xenophobic junior hunters of Central Yharnam. One of the more interesting parts of Central Yharnam is this staircase. When you approach, there are a bunch of hunter mobs descending the stairs. These guys are supposed to be out hunting beasts, but when you climb the stairs, 2 fully transformed werewolves are at the top. There's no way the mobs missed them. The game clearly doesn't bother to differentiate between the enemy types here. As much as the mobs profess to be beast hunters, we see there's no two sides to this conflict. They're all just beasts. Some of the mobs have a bit of fur, some of them have elongated arms, and many of them are just guys. The commonality is the violence and the lust for blood. In that way, they're all the same. Bloodborne is a game that uses eyes to represent insight and closeness to the Great Ones, so it's really telling that the symbol of a blood-drunk hunter is an eye with a destroyed pupil. The symbolism is really on point. In Old Yharnam, we're introduced to the hunter Jura, and what I'm going to call the caterpillars. I call them caterpillars because they're black and fuzzy and relatively harmless. This area of Yharnam has been entirely taken over by the beasts. Jura, instead of trying to eradicate all of the beasts of Old Yharnam, is protecting them. These beasts are interesting. Right behind Jura, we find a church where the beasts are clearly worshipping a larger, crucified beast. These beasts will also back away from you if you have fire equipped, which is cool. The lore reason for this is that Old Yharnam has been burned down in an attempt to kill the beasts, and the beasts remember and fear the fire. This means a couple of things. First of all, these beasts have memory, and they have self-preservation. They actually want to be alive more than they want to kill you, which is untrue for most of the beasts. When we descend to the bottom of Old Yharnam, instead of the caterpillars, we see werewolves like the ones in Central Yharnam. This is the area where the fire started, and these guys probably turned before Old Yharnam was fully taken over by the beasts. Here's a question. What causes people to turn into different beasts? We know that the blood is the source of the plague, but why are the beasts different from each other? The game tells us that the clergy of the church turn into the most fearsome beasts. Why is that? And why is there differentiation between the caterpillars, werewolves, and other beasts in Bloodborne? One theory is that the power of the beast is linked to the amount of blood administration you get. I think this is incorrect. Gilbert is an NPC you meet near the beginning of the game. He's an outsider like you who traveled to Yharnam to receive blood administration for his sickness. Since he seems to be very sick, it would follow that he would receive a lot of blood, which should turn him into at least a werewolf. But it doesn't. Instead, we find him as a caterpillar, right outside his window. Why is this what he turns into? Part 2. The Dichotomy of Lawrence and Ludwig. In the first layer of the DLC, The Hunter's Nightmare, we encounter two bosses, Lawrence and Ludwig. Both of these bosses are the remnants of the Healing Church. Lawrence was the first vicar, Ludwig was the leader of the Church Hunters. As such, they are two of the most monstrous beasts in the game. Lawrence is a flaming cleric beast, while Ludwig is the most horrifying abomination you've ever seen. Both bosses have multiple phases, and this is where they start to diverge. During Lawrence's phase 2, his legs explode. He starts spewing lava, falls on the ground, starts crawling around after you, screaming and flailing about. He's still difficult, but he's also kind of wretched. Every ounce of his humanity is gone. He has no sense of self-preservation left. All he's capable of doing is trying to kill you and crying out in pain. He is nothing but the beast. When Ludwig gets to half health, something interesting happens.
You were at my side all along. My true mentor, my guiding moonlight.
After Ludwig draws his sword, he is noticeably less bestial. He's no longer on all fours, or however many he has. He's standing up, fighting like a human. He has technique and a certain level of patience. He's still trying to kill you, but he's also clearly showing a certain level of restraint, especially when compared to his phase 1. What does he mean when he says this? I've seen people interpret this moment as a triumph of the will. The honorable knight Ludwig, through sheer willpower, overwhelms the beast inside and stands up one more time with pride. When I hear this explanation, I get a little bit offended for Mrs. Gascoigne. Ludwig loves his sword more than Gascoigne loved his wife. What does willpower mean anyway? If strength is lifting something heavy, then what is the corresponding action for willpower? What does Ludwig do here that's so difficult? The game talks a lot about how all hunters are destined for beasthood, how it's inevitable, but what makes Ludwig different? Ludwig was the head of the Church Hunters. He was famously an anti-beast fanatic. How do we think he would have felt about becoming a beast? I think Ludwig is dealing with some deep self-loathing. He has become the very thing he swore to eliminate from this world. It would probably be humiliating, even painful for his sword to be wielded by a beast, even if he was that beast. You were by my side all along. Despite being a beast, his sword is still by his side. He's still the honorable knight that he once was, even as a beast. I don't think this moment represents him overcoming his beasthood. I think this is when he accepts it. This is the difference between Lawrence and Ludwig. Both of these men hate the idea that humanity is inherently bestial. They hate their own bestial natures. Even in the end, Lawrence could never accept his beasthood. But Ludwig could. Why do church officials become the worst, largest, most violent beasts, while many Yharnamites become relatively harmless caterpillars? One strong correlation here is that the worst beasts come from anti-beast fanatics. In Old Yharnam, we see werewolves in the place where the fire started and caterpillars everywhere else. These werewolves probably spawned from Old Yharnam's hunter mobs, while the caterpillars came after it was accepted that Old Yharnam was lost. In Central Yharnam, we see the same pattern. The werewolves we see come from the hunter mobs, while the only caterpillar comes from Gilbert, a man who has more or less accepted his fate, who drops a carol rune associated with accepting beasthood. I implied at the beginning of the video that I believe beasthood is inherent to humanity, that I believe it is an expression of our true selves, in the game anyway. Still, Bloodborne presents us with a method for achieving peace. We can never escape being beasts, but we can still live as beasts. We can be less violent, more noble. The only way we can achieve this is through acceptance of who we are.
In case you fail to realize, the things you hunt, they're not beasts. They're people. One day you will see.
Part 3. The difference between humans and Great Ones. Let's talk about the Orphan of Cause, because there's one aspect that I didn't talk about. The Orphan has 2 phases, and I want to look at the difference between them. Besides the little ribbons and the heightened aggression, the biggest difference between the phases is the Orphan's size and its stance. In Phase 1, it stands up tall, with legs almost straight when not attacking. During Phase 2, it becomes much larger and hunched over. Notice the way the torso bends. Garden of Eyes posted a mod video showing the Orphan's 2 phases fighting each other. You can see how big the difference is. Compared to Phase 1, Phase 2 is enormous, though a lot of the size difference is hard to see. The Orphan is so hunched over that if it remained its original size, it would be shorter than the Hunter. I believe this phase is meant to represent a beast transformation. The pose the Orphan takes is so similar to the other beast bosses you fight before. Gascoigne becomes a larger, hunched over version of himself. The way the Orphan holds its weapon is like Vicar Amelia holding her pendant, bent arms low to the ground. The Orphan also develops a bestial fighting style with attacks that carry it forward. Throughout Bloodborne, we find human characters that have been consumed by obsession with the Great Ones. Humans who have made contact with the Great Ones and who have been destroyed by that contact. The best example of this is Willem. He was always obsessed with insight. He has always wanted eyes on the inside like the Great Ones. When we meet him, his wish has been granted. He now has so much insight that he's been reduced to a blob in a chair with mushrooms growing out, only capable of rocking slowly and observing the universe. As he feebly indicates the moon with his staff, you can only wonder what he would say about it if he could still talk. I think there are parallels to be drawn between Willem and the Orphan. Both of them have made contact with an alien species, and both of them were destroyed by that contact. The obvious difference is that Willem's contact was consensual. Willem, Byrgenwerth, and the Church were all obsessed with the Great Ones to the point of worship. They wanted to be Great Ones, or be like them. If we look at Willem, I think we can see this is a misguided goal. Willem's condition is not an enviable state. While humanity doesn't have eyes on the inside, it at least has the ability to move. If we look at the inverse situation, the Orphan of Cause is the toughest boss in the game. Its violence and aggression make it less like a Great One, but they also make it really good at killing you. Being more human gives it an advantage. All this to say, humans have something that the Great Ones don't. The Church would have you believe that the Great Ones are superior to humanity in every way, that the Great Ones are a goal to aspire to. Really, I think the Great Ones are fundamentally different in nature to humanity. Great Ones have eyes on the inside, and humans have Beasthood. This gives Great Ones some strength, and humans others. As an example of one of these strengths, we need to talk about childbirth. There's a ton of symbolism in Bloodborne related to birth, along with 2 actual births and 1 labor. This makes a lot of sense. We like to pretend that birth is beautiful, but birth is a violent, bloody affair. In Bloodborne, you go out of this world the same way you come into it, screaming and covered in blood. Personally, I would have loved to see a gameplay mechanic revolving around birth, though I can understand that that would have been in bad taste. It would have been great for representation though, since it would have meant every male hunter was trans, though according to many theorists, that is still the case. There aren't a lot of item descriptions that mention birth. However, some of the most important items in the game, the 3rd umbilical cords, give us some unique insight into the Great Ones. Every Great One loses its child, and then yearns for a surrogate. I think there's some evidence that the Great Ones struggle to reproduce. Throughout the game, we encounter 3 women who have been impregnated by formless Odin: Queen Yarnum, Ariana, and imposter Yosefka. Only the Queen was able to give birth to a true Great One, and considering the other 2 were impregnated literally during this night, we can assume that there were many others. Why does Odin do this? Does Odin need the humans' help to reproduce? While the game doesn't answer these questions concretely, I believe we can assume the answer is yes. The Church would likely find it heretical. Why should the Great Ones need anything from a human? They're superior life forms, they have eyes on the inside, they can figure it out. Except they can't. The Great Ones aren't better than humans. If a Great One and a human each tried to make a sandwich, the Great One wouldn't make a better sandwich. The Great Ones have their strengths and their weaknesses, but humans have their own strengths as well. Part 4. The True Nature of the Moon Presence. What do Great Ones think about humans? What's their opinion? Compared to the Great Ones, humans are incredibly violent. They come into this world violently and live short, violent lives. I think Willem puts it best.
We are born of the blood, made men by the blood, undone by the blood.
I honestly think the Great Ones would be scared and fascinated by us. A big part of the mystique of the Great Ones is that they hide in plain sight, invisible and watching over us from their dream realms. This does make them scary, but think about this from the other perspective. Great Ones aren't that much tougher than the strongest beasts, and humans kill them pretty regularly. The lesser amygdalas are scary because they sit unseen on the sides of buildings, but how long would they last if they were clearly visible? Imagine being them, sitting on the buildings, watching these creatures that could probably kill you if they knew you were there. The analogy I think of is the old stories about vampires where they can't get into your house if you don't give them permission to enter. You imagine them skulking around outside, peering in through the window, waiting for their chance. Sure, there are special rules that make you invincible to these monsters, but only if you stay inside your sanctuary. Even if you're perfectly safe, it's still scary. Bloodborne is a monster story where humans are the monsters. The game tells you this from the very beginning. The point here is that we're not just monsters to each other, we're monsters to the Great Ones as well. We are scary and powerful in our own way. Which leads us to the Moon Presence and its deal with Gehrman. The most basic understanding of this deal is that the Moon Presence wants Gehrman and his hunters to kill the child of a Great One. It's not clear whether this deal was specifically to kill Murgo or any child of Odin, or if any infant Great One would have worked. Either way, this deal is at its core a hit. The Moon Presence orders a hit on another Great One. Why did the Moon Presence order a hit, and did it need a human for this? Earlier we talked about how the Great Ones, or at least Odin, needed a human's help to reproduce. There are some tasks humans are better suited for than Great Ones. Given the way human nature is depicted in Bloodborne, killing is probably one of these tasks. If humans are monsters, then this deal with Gehrman is a demonic summoning. Why did the Moon Presence order Murgo's death? I don't think the motive is important here. It could be profound, or it could be a Great One version of petty. Maybe Odin offended the Moon Presence in some way. My personal read on the Moon Presence is that it ordered the death of Murgo because the option was available. For comparison, let's look at Light Yagami from Death Note. Death Note is a story about a high school boy who finds a notebook that kills the people whose names are written inside. He decides to use this notebook to kill every criminal in the world, then starts killing anyone who would try to stop him. The show makes it very clear that the power of the notebook is the problem, not Light himself.
Kira is pure evil. We can all agree on that. But recently I've started thinking of this whole situation in a different way. What is truly evil is the power to kill people. And any person who has come to possess this kind of power is cursed. No matter how you use it, no true happiness can be obtained like that, not by killing other people.
I think the Moon Presence is like Light Yagami. I think it kills because it's intoxicated and corrupted by the power, not by a notebook, but by the violence of humanity. I know this is probably unsatisfying from a lore perspective since it doesn't give the Moon Presence an actual motive, but from a thematic perspective I think it adds a lot. Bloodborne is full of examples of human characters who have been corrupted by the Great Ones, not just physically, but personally. I think the human who's most similar to the Moon Presence is actually Lawrence. Despite knowing the old adage, Lawrence still falls victim to the old blood. He literally cannot help himself, and I think the Moon Presence is the same way. My reading of Bloodborne revolves largely around the toxic relationship between the Great Ones and humanity. Both parties would probably be better off if they had nothing to do with each other, but they can't leave each other alone. Bloodborne is a game that has a lot to say about humanity, and it does this by giving us a foil. The Great Ones are very much like us, but also very different. We have a beast inside of us. They do not. Part 5. We are all beasts. Why do we hunt? Bloodborne tells us over and over again that the hunt is not a solution to the beast problem. If every hunter is destined to become a beast, you don't need to be a mathematician to know that you'll never run out of beasts. The violence of the hunt creates beasts and makes existing beasts more violent. So why do we do it? The answer is because it's in our nature to hunt. We start to see it in characters like Alfred. He seems like a nice, dependable guy and a good source of information. Until...
Master, look! I've done it! I've done it! I've smashed and
pounded and grounded this rotten siren into fleshy pink pulp. There, you filthy monstrosity. What good's your immortality now? Try stirring up trouble in this sorry state. All mangled and twisted, with every inside on the outside for all the world to see.
Then there are the church doctors, those strange, emotionless humans who feel more alien than the beasts. There are the townsfolk, most of whom exhibit zero empathy or compassion for anyone. There are the men's scholars, who commit many of the most violent atrocities in the game despite not having transformed into beasts. Every human in Bloodborne is bestial in some way. There's no use in fighting it. Only by accepting your own bestial nature can you gain any control over it. This is the opposite message of a lot of religious institutions. The Healing Church is set up to be a kind of evil Catholicism. It commands that the beasts be wiped out, that humanity reject its own sinful nature in order to become closer to God. They study their gods and pray to be granted eyes on the inside. But these gods are different. We aren't made in their image. When we meet the Son of God, he isn't human. We learn that torturing and killing the Son of God, instead of absolving us of sin, is a source of sin. The Orphan of Cause is the original sin of the Hunters, and, by extension, of the Church. These gods shouldn't be worshipped. They can't save you or forgive you. They don't care about you, and any relationship with them is purely transactional. Their blood heals us, but it also reveals and emphasizes our true nature. Beasthood is a concept that many people identify with. As someone who struggled with mental health issues my entire life, I understand having these difficult feelings that you wish weren't there, that feel like they're turning you into someone you're not supposed to be. Bloodborne is real with you. It tells you that this is the human condition. You are not perfect. You are not at peace. You are a savage, bloody creature living in a savage, bloody cycle. You will have strange, antisocial feelings and urges, and if you don't acknowledge them, you will lose control to them. Bloodborne doesn't make you feel good about this. In fact, it makes you feel horrified. But in that horror lies catharsis. You accept yourself, and you revel in the absolutely disgusting hypocrisy of the Church.
Fear the old blood. I tell you, I will not forget our adage.
The One Reborn is honestly hilarious. The Church wonders to itself, how can I become closer to the gods? These powerful, wise, peaceful gods. And it comes up with the most bestial solution possible. Imagine being an amygdala on a building, watching the birth of this thing, and thinking to yourself,
is that supposed to be me?
The message is clear, over and over again. Humans are beasts. The more you deny it, the more violent you become.
Beasts all over the shop. You'll be one of them, sooner or later.
Hey everybody, thanks for watching so far in the video. This is my first time making something like this, so if there's anything I can improve on, please let me know. I'm actually working on my own game right now called Never Kill a Unicorn. It's a murder mystery with a time loop element, so if that's something that interests you, I will be releasing devlogs for that game on this channel, so subscribe.